Performative mindset. Imagine spending months building a stunning, life-sized replica of a mansion entirely out of cardboard. It looks incredibly impressive to everyone driving by on the street, but it becomes completely useless the exact moment it starts to rain. Designing your daily habits, your career, and your personality solely for the applause of an audience rather than your own internal foundation is the defining mechanism of the performative mindset. We naturally crave belonging and recognition from our tribe. However, the modern environment has warped this healthy biological desire into an endless, exhausting broadcast. We start reading books just to display the covers, adopting difficult hobbies merely to seem interesting to strangers, and holding loud opinions simply because they are currently popular. The actual, lived experience of an activity becomes entirely secondary to the social currency we gain from being seen doing it. We incorrectly mistake the loud validation of a crowd for the quiet reality of genuine competence. The profound danger of this constant performance is the complete erosion of your authentic self. When every single action is carefully calculated for public consumption, you slowly lose touch with what actually brings you joy in private. You burn massive amounts of energy constantly maintaining a fragile facade, living in permanent, quiet terror of being exposed as an imposter. Furthermore, when the external applause inevitably fades or the audience simply looks away, you are left entirely empty, realizing you have built a life optimized for a photograph rather than a reality built to be lived. To dismantle this exhausting theatrical production, you must actively practice the heavy discipline of absolute secrecy. You have to intentionally engage in difficult, meaningful tasks and completely refuse to tell a single soul about them. Master a complex new skill, finish a massive creative project, or complete a grueling physical challenge, and aggressively guard that information from the outside world. By forcing yourself to do the work entirely in the dark, you slowly rebuild the necessary muscle of internal validation, trading the cheap thrill of an audience for the unshakable quiet of genuine self-respect. Rescue fantasy. Standing on the roof of a burning building waiting for a helicopter that was never actually dispatched is a tragic way to handle an emergency. Passively waiting for an external savior to parachute in and effortlessly fix the messy reality of your everyday life is the exact trap of the rescue fantasy. We are culturally conditioned by cinematic endings to expect a dramatic intervention right when things look their bleakest. Because doing the grueling, unglamorous work of repairing our own finances, relationships, or daily habits is incredibly exhausting. Our brains secretly construct a comforting escape hatch. We quietly convince ourselves that a perfect partner, a brilliant mentor, or a sudden stroke of incredible luck is just around the corner, ready to sweep us away from our current struggles. We mistake this passive wishing for actual hope. The profound danger of this fantasy is the permanent paralysis it induces. When you genuinely believe that someone else is assigned to fix your life, you completely abandon your own personal agency. You tolerate miserable situations and stagnation, entirely convinced that your endurance will eventually be rewarded with a magical rescue. You put your personal growth on indefinite hold, actively watching your own potential decay while you stare out the window waiting for a hero who is never going to arrive. To break free from this waiting room, you must deeply internalize the harsh but incredibly liberating truth that no one is coming to save you. You have to officially appoint yourself as the primary first responder of your own life, Identify one specific, nagging problem you have been hoping the universe would solve for you and take a single physical step toward fixing it yourself today. By dropping the illusion of the phantom helicopter, you finally pick up the tools required to build your own way out. Blind effort trap. Flooring the gas pedal of a car buried deep in the mud only spins the wheels faster and sinks the heavy vehicle further into the ground. Pouring endless amounts of raw brute force into a problem without ever pausing to change your strategy is the exact trap of the blind effort mindset. We are culturally conditioned from childhood to worship the grind. We falsely wire our brains to assume that if we just endure enough pain, sacrifice our sleep, and simply work harder than everyone else, success is mathematically guaranteed. We completely confuse the physical sensation of exhaustion with the actual reality of progress. When we hit a massive roadblock, our immediate instinct is never to look for a lever or a better angle. Our instinct is to just push our bare hands harder against the concrete. The profound danger of this mindset is massive burnout combined with zero actual reward. You can spend an entire decade moving at 100 miles an hour in the exact opposite direction of your ultimate goal. Because you are suffering so much, you feel entirely justified in your lack of results, often becoming deeply bitter that the universe is not rewarding your intense grind. You become stubbornly attached to your own fatigue, actively ignoring obvious negative feedback and flatly refusing to pivot because you have already invested so much agonizing effort into a broken plan. To break this exhausting cycle, you must aggressively separate the illusion of motion from the reality of progress. You have to stop blindly worshipping hard work and start ruthlessly auditing your leverage. Before you pour another 100 hours into a frustrating project, force yourself to step completely away from the vehicle and evaluate the terrain. Find the frictionless path, learn to use a specialized tool, or completely redesign the system from the ground up. By intentionally shifting your focus from the volume of your effort to the quality of your strategy, you finally trade the painful pride of pure exhaustion for actual forward momentum. The boredom is death mindset. Staring at a blank wall for 5 minutes without reaching into your pocket for a screen feels like physical torture for most modern brains. This desperate, frantic need to constantly plug every second of downtime with noise is the exact mechanism of the boredom is death mindset. We have accidentally trained our nervous systems to treat understimulation as a fatal threat. A quiet commute, a slow line at the grocery store, or a brief pause in a conversation immediately triggers a panic response. To escape this mild discomfort, we instantly flood our senses with endless feeds, rapid-fire videos, and overlapping audio tracks. We mistakenly believe that constant mental input equals living a full life, treating empty time as a problem to be solved rather than a space to be utilized. The profound danger of this relentless consumption is that it completely suffocates your own internal voice. True creativity and deep problem solving do not happen when your brain is actively processing a heavy stream of new data. They happen in the empty spaces. When you eradicate all the blank margins from your day, you permanently lose the ability to generate original ideas or carefully process complex emotions. You become a pure consumer, endlessly reacting to external stimuli while your own mental machinery rusts from disuse. To reverse this damage, you must actively court the feeling of understimulation. You have to rebuild your tolerance for the quiet void. Start by intentionally leaving your phone in another room while you drink your morning coffee. Sit on a bench and simply watch the traffic pass by without listening to a podcast. Let the initial wave of anxious boredom wash over you, and then ride it out. You will quickly realize that the quiet space you were so terrified of is actually the exact environment where your mind finally gets to breathe. The silence phobia, slipping into the driver's seat of a car and instantly cranking the radio volume before the engine even turns over, is a reflex for most of us. We instinctively flood our environment with podcasts, music, and background videos the moment the noise level drops. This frantic, automatic reaction to fill the quiet is the defining symptom of the silence phobia. We treat an empty, quiet room as if it were a vacuum that must be aggressively plugged. In reality, we are not running toward the entertainment. We are running away from our own internal monologue. When the external world goes quiet, the internal world gets incredibly loud. Unresolved anxieties, difficult decisions, and complex emotions immediately rise to the surface. To avoid wrestling with these uncomfortable thoughts, we simply drown them out with a constant, heavy stream of digital noise. The severe danger of this auditory anesthesia is that you completely lose touch with who you are. If you never allow yourself the space to process your own experiences, you stop generating original ideas. Your mind becomes a mere echo chamber of other people's opinions and algorithms. You navigate through your days entirely on autopilot, reacting to external stimuli without ever pausing to ask yourself if you are actually heading in the right direction. To cure this phobia, you must slowly reintroduce yourself to the quiet. Treat silence like a muscle that has completely atrophied. Start incredibly small. Try driving to the grocery store with the radio completely off. Sit on your couch for just 3 minutes without reaching for your phone. Allow your brain to wander and let the uncomfortable thoughts surface without immediately suppressing them. You will quickly discover that the silence is not empty at all. It is the only place where you can actually hear yourself think. The digital anesthesia. Swallowing a heavy painkiller every time you feel a mild breeze on your skin guarantees you will eventually go completely numb to the entire physical world. Reaching for a glowing screen the exact second you experience a microscopic drop of boredom, sadness, or anxiety is the exact same mechanism. This automatic reflex defines the digital anesthesia mindset. We carry a highly efficient numbing agent in our pockets at all times. Because processing difficult emotions like frustration, loneliness, or even simple restlessness requires agonizing mental energy, we naturally seek an immediate escape hatch. We open an app, scroll an endless feed, or binge a rapid succession of bright videos the very moment an uncomfortable feeling begins to surface. We mistake the temporary silencing of our internal friction for an actual solution to our daily problems. The profound danger of this constant self-medication is the complete destruction of your emotional immune system. When you instantly anesthetize every single negative feeling, you permanently lose the ability to navigate normal human adversity. You become incredibly fragile, relying entirely on a digital pacifier just to survive a quiet afternoon. Furthermore, you completely starve yourself of the deep, necessary insights that only arrive when you are forced to sit alone with your own difficult thoughts. You survive the day without feeling the pain, but you ensure the underlying wound never actually heals. To break free from this digital drip, you must actively practice sitting in the quiet discomfort. You have to intentionally leave your phone in another room when you feel a wave of anxiety or boredom approaching. As you relax in this Sleepwise session, give yourself permission to feel the raw texture of your own thoughts without immediately reaching for a distraction. By letting the uncomfortable emotions simply wash over you in the silence, you rebuild the mental endurance required to actually process your life instead of merely pausing it. The impulse commander. Your phone buzzes on the desk, and before your conscious brain even registers the sound, your hand has already unlocked the screen. You were right in the middle of a complex task, yet a completely automatic reflex just hijacked your attention. This lightning-fast surrender to sudden urges is the defining behavior of the impulse commander mindset. Our nervous systems constantly generate temporary desires based on our immediate environment. A flash of boredom, a sudden craving, or a bright notification creates a tiny spike of physical tension. The impulse commander operates by instantly caving to that tension just to extinguish the discomfort. There is absolutely no gap between feeling the urge and executing the action. You bypass your own deliberate decision-making process entirely, handing total control over to your reflexes. Living this way systematically strips you of your personal autonomy. When every passing whim dictates your physical behavior, you lose the ability to steer your own life. You become a highly reactive passenger, constantly pulled off course by whatever shiny distraction or passing emotion happens to be the loudest in the room. Meaningful, long-term goals become practically impossible to reach because lasting achievement fundamentally requires the capacity to ignore hundreds of trivial, immediate temptations in favor of a distant reward. Defeating this mindset requires building a heavy mental brake pedal. You have to intentionally pry open the gap between a stimulus and your physical response. When you feel that sudden magnetic pull to abandon your work or grab a cheap distraction, force your body to freeze. Make yourself sit completely still and count to 20 before you move a single muscle. That tiny, excruciating window of forced hesitation is exactly where your conscious mind wakes up, evaluates the urge, and finally takes the steering wheel back from your impulses. The short-term optimization. Every time your alarm clock goes off, a high-stakes negotiation begins in the dark. Your tired body demands the immediate comfort of the snooze button, while your future self begs you to get up and start the day. This daily, silent battle is the front line of the short-term optimization mindset. We are fundamentally wired to prioritize the present moment. The human brain naturally discounts the value of rewards that are months or years away, heavily favoring immediate relief. Eating junk food, scrolling through short videos, or skipping a difficult work session provides instant comfort. You feel a sudden drop in stress, so your brain registers the decision as a total success. You trade a massive future payoff for a tiny, fleeting moment of ease. The danger is that this instinct easily becomes the default operating system for your entire life. By constantly optimizing your choices to make the next 5 minutes as comfortable as possible, you actively sabotage your next 5 years. You never experience deep, compounding growth in your skills, your health, or your relationships because you continually cash out your effort early. You end up trapped in a loop of quick fixes, perpetually treating the symptoms of boredom or stress while your actual life remains completely stagnant. To break this cycle, you must artificially extend your timeline of consequence. When faced with a daily choice, pause and mentally project the outcome 10 months down the road instead of 10 minutes. Delaying gratification is a muscle that must be intentionally trained through small acts of resistance. Endure 10 minutes of silence without reaching for a distraction. Push through the first uncomfortable phase of a workout. By consistently choosing the slightly harder option today, you slowly build a resilient foundation that makes everything exponentially better tomorrow. The Novelty Junkie. Purchasing a brand new notebook feels incredibly inspiring right up until the exact moment you have to write on the first page. The sudden thrill of acquiring the tool completely overshadows the actual reality of doing the work. This constant pursuit of the shiny and new over the steady and proven is the exact engine driving the novelty junkie mindset. We are biologically wired to crave fresh stimuli. Starting a completely new project, adopting a new diet, or downloading a new piece of productivity software triggers a massive, unearned spike in excitement. The beginning phase of any endeavor is totally frictionless because it is filled with infinite potential and zero actual struggle. You get to feel like a visionary without having to do the heavy lifting. The profound danger of this addiction to beginnings is the massive graveyard of abandoned goals it leaves behind. The novelty junkie bails out the exact second the initial rush fades and the inevitable, boring grind of skill acquisition begins. They drop the current project the moment it gets difficult and immediately hunt for the cheap thrill of a fresh start. Consequently, they possess 20 half-finished hobbies, a dozen abandoned business plans, and absolutely zero mastered skills. They are perpetually stuck at day one. To cure this addiction, you must completely reframe your relationship with boredom. You have to recognize that the sudden loss of excitement is never a signal to quit. It is the definitive signal that the real work is finally starting. Commit to pushing through the uncomfortable plateau where the daily tasks become repetitive and unglamorous. By refusing to chase the next shiny object and forcing yourself to finish what you started, you finally trade the cheap thrill of a new beginning for the deep satisfaction of an actual achievement. The surface-level skim, skipping a flat rock across a calm lake, creates a satisfying series of fast, flashy splashes before the stone inevitably sinks. The rock touches a dozen different spots, but never penetrates deeper than a fraction of an inch until momentum dies. Bouncing endlessly from one shallow topic to the next without ever diving deep is the exact mechanism of the surface-level skim. We live in an era of infinite feeds and endless scrolls. Our attention is constantly fractured by 10-second clips, punchy headlines, and bite-sized summaries. Because we are exposed to so many different subjects in a single afternoon, we trick our brains into feeling incredibly productive and well-informed. We read the introductory paragraph of a complex issue and immediately swipe away, mistaking a passing familiarity for genuine understanding. The ultimate danger of this habit is the steady erosion of your capacity for deep focus. When you train your brain to abandon a subject the precise moment it requires actual mental effort, you lose the ability to do difficult, meaningful work. You become someone who knows a tiny bit about everything, but actually masters absolutely nothing. This leaves you highly vulnerable in a reality that heavily rewards deep, specialized competence. You build a wide vocabulary of concepts, yet completely lack the necessary grit to solve a single hard problem. To break this habit, you must intentionally force yourself to sink below the surface. Choose one single topic, book, or skill, and completely block out all other inputs. When the inevitable urge to click away and find something new hits, sit entirely still with that discomfort. By pushing through the initial resistance and spending dedicated time focusing on just one complex thing, you rebuild the mental endurance required for true mastery. The main character syndrome, walking through a crowded grocery store completely convinced that every other shopper is a background extra placed there solely to react to your outfit, is a bizarre way to live. Treating everyday reality as a cinematic production where you are the sole protagonist is the defining illusion of main character syndrome. We naturally view the world exclusively from behind our own eyes, which makes it incredibly easy to accidentally inflate our personal importance. We begin to frame every external event random coincidence, and passing comment as something specifically designed to impact our personal storyline. We mistake our internal perspective for objective reality, expecting the rest of the world to naturally yield to our desires and perfectly understand our unstated needs. The profound danger of this mindset is the rapid decay of genuine empathy. When you believe the universe revolves entirely around your narrative, you become incredibly fragile to normal, everyday friction. A standard traffic jam stops being a shared logistical problem and instantly becomes a targeted attack on your personal schedule. Worse, you start viewing your friends, co-workers, and partners not as complex individuals with their own rich lives, but as supporting cast members whose only real purpose is to validate your feelings and applaud your development. To dismantle this exhausting production, you must actively practice intentional insignificance. You have to routinely remind yourself that every single person you pass on the street is navigating a life just as intricate, confusing, and overwhelming as your own. When a minor inconvenience strikes, force your brain to view the situation from a neutral, third-party perspective. By stepping down from the imaginary pedestal and accepting your role as just one regular person among billions, you immediately shed the heavy burden of having to constantly perform. The status anxiety. Staring at a neighbor's newly paved driveway and suddenly feeling a deep, physical wave of shame about your own perfectly functional gravel path is a completely irrational but incredibly common human reaction. Allowing the arbitrary possessions and titles of the people next door to dictate your internal sense of self-worth is the exact engine driving status anxiety. We are biologically wired to care about our rank within a tribe, but the modern world has drastically weaponized this instinct. Instead of comparing ourselves to a few dozen people in a village, we now measure our daily lives against a global feed of billionaires, prodigies, and heavily curated influencers. We constantly scan our environment to figure out exactly where we sit on the invisible ladder, adjusting our spending, our career choices, and our personalities just to make sure we do not fall behind the pack. The profound danger of this endless comparison is that it forces you to live an entirely reactive life. You end up taking on massive debt to buy a vehicle you do not even enjoy, simply to impress people you do not even like. You climb a brutal corporate ladder for a title that looks impressive on a digital profile, completely ignoring the fact that the actual daily work makes you miserable. Because there will always be someone with a slightly bigger house or a slightly better job. This anxiety guarantees a permanent state of exhaustion and dissatisfaction. To step off this exhausting treadmill, you must intentionally build a localized internal scorecard. You have to clearly define what a successful life looks like for you, entirely independent of anyone else's metrics. When the natural urge to look sideways hits, aggressively force your attention back to your own hands and your own path. By refusing to play a game where the rules are written by strangers, you finally reclaim the energy needed to build a life that actually fits you. The comparison trap. You finally finish building a simple wooden chair with your own hands. You step back, wiping sweat from your forehead, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. Then, you glance at your phone and see a teenager standing in front of a massive tech company they just sold for millions. In a fraction of a second, the pride in your chest vanishes, replaced by a hollow ache of inadequacy. This instant evaporation of joy is the defining symptom of the comparison trap. We are biologically wired to constantly scan our environment and assess our social standing. For our ancestors, knowing where they ranked in a small tribe was a matter of survival. Today, That ancient instinct is weaponized against us. We are surrounded by glowing screens that endlessly broadcast the absolute peaks of human achievement, wealth, and beauty from across the globe. The core danger of this mindset is the severe distortion of data. You are never making a fair assessment. You are taking your day one, the clumsy, frustrating beginning of a new skill or journey, and stacking it directly against someone else's year 10. You weigh your messy, unedited, behind-the-scenes reality against a highly produced, carefully filtered final product. This creates an artificial gap that feels impossible to close. The resulting discouragement is paralyzing. You feel so hopelessly far behind that the effort required to start suddenly feels pointless. The motivation to put in the daily toil is crushed under the weight of someone else's polished success, causing you to surrender before you even establish momentum. To dismantle this trap, you have to aggressively narrow your field of vision. The only valid, logical metric for your progress is the person you were yesterday. When the urge strikes to measure your life against a stranger's highlight reel, forcefully redirect your attention back to your own baseline. Document your personal milestones. By tuning out the external noise and making your past self your only competitor, you reclaim the focus required to actually grow. The Instagram reality filter. Walking through a movie set filled with painted storefronts feels exactly like strolling down a bustling city block, right up until you try to open one of the fake doors. Accepting that flat painted facade as a fully functioning building is the exact illusion driving the Instagram reality filter mindset. We exist in a digital environment where every image, video, and life update is heavily curated before it ever reaches our screens. People naturally crop out the messy countertops, edit away the blemishes, and completely hide the mundane, frustrating hours of their day. They present a flawless, highly saturated highlight reel of exotic vacations, perfect relationships, and effortless success. Because this is the only angle we are allowed to see, our brains slowly begin to accept this manufactured perfection as the normal baseline for human existence. The profound danger of this filter is the agonizing gap it creates between your actual life and the fictional lives of everyone else. You look at your own unedited, behind-the-scenes reality, filled with awkward moments, boring chores, and daily friction, and you incorrectly conclude that you are drastically failing. This chronic sense of inadequacy drains your daily joy and forces you to start living your own life purely for the aesthetic. You stop enjoying the actual experience because you are too busy trying to photograph it perfectly. To shatter this filter, you must aggressively sanitize your digital environment. Unfollow any account that consistently leaves you feeling inadequate or behind in life. You have to actively remind your brain that you are watching a heavily produced stage play, not a live documentary. Shift your focus away from capturing the perfect angle and invest that energy into building a reality that actually feels good on the inside, regardless of how it looks through a lens. The cheat code obsession. Spending 3 hours setting up a new productivity app, color-coding a complex study schedule, and searching forums for the ultimate memorization hack to avoid reading a 20-minute chapter is a remarkably common trap. This exhaustive search for a frictionless bypass is the hallmark of the cheat code obsession. We are naturally drawn to the promise of maximum output for minimum effort. The modern digital landscape constantly feeds this desire, offering endless secrets, life hacks, and optimization routines guaranteed to skip the line. We convince ourselves that the straightforward method of simply sitting down and doing the work is somehow outdated or inefficient. We equate finding a shortcut with being smart. The profound danger of this mindset is that the hunt for the bypass becomes a highly disguised form of procrastination. You expend massive amounts of mental energy trying to outsmart the process, completely draining the fuel needed to actually execute the task. Furthermore, bypassing the foundational work means you skip the necessary friction that builds genuine competence. You end up with a brittle set of tricks instead of a deep, resilient skill set. When the shortcut inevitably stops working, you lack the core strength and discipline required to recover. To break free from this obsession, you must deliberately embrace the unsexy, traditional path. The next time you catch yourself scrolling for a faster method or a hidden trick, immediately shut down the search. Accept that the most efficient way forward is almost always straight through the resistance. Sit down, embrace the boring repetition, and engage in the actual work. You will quickly discover that the effort required to build a solid foundation is far less exhausting than the endless, anxious hunt for an easy way out. The vulnerability is weakness myth. Wearing a full suit of medieval armor to a casual dinner party guarantees you will not get scratched, but it also makes it physically impossible to shake hands, embrace a friend, or comfortably sit at the table. Operating with a rigid emotional guard up at all times is the exact mechanism of the vulnerability is weakness myth. We are conditioned from an early age to view total emotional detachment as the ultimate sign of strength. We hide our insecurities, mask our failures, and flatly refuse to ask for help. We are terrified that revealing a single microscopic flaw will cause our peers to immediately lose respect for us. We incorrectly equate being impenetrable with being powerful, treating our own normal human emotions as dangerous liabilities that must be heavily suppressed and permanently hidden from the outside world. The profound danger of wearing this heavy emotional armor is the intense, quiet isolation it inevitably creates. When you constantly project a flawless, bulletproof facade, you actively block any genuine connection with other people. Authentic relationships require a mutual exchange of actual experience, which inherently involves sharing your doubts and your struggles. By refusing to ever let your guard down, you starve yourself of the deep, meaningful bonds that actually sustain you. You survive the day completely unbruised, but you live it entirely alone, trapped inside a heavy, exhausting fortress of your own making. To dismantle this destructive myth, you must actively practice the quiet, terrifying courage of being emotionally exposed. You have to fundamentally recognize that sharing a genuine struggle or admitting a mistake requires significantly more inner strength than simply hiding behind a fake smile. Start by telling a trusted friend about a minor frustration or openly asking for help on a task you cannot figure out. Lowering the drawbridge and allowing yourself to be seen as a flawed, complex human being is the only reliable way to build actual resilience and invite real connection into your life. The zero tolerance for struggle. Imagine the physical sensation of trying something you are bad at. You pick up a guitar, stare at a blank page, or walk into a new gym. Immediately, a wave of discomfort hits you. You feel clumsy and exposed. Your brain starts screaming for an exit, urging you to check your phone or find a distraction. This reaction isn't just laziness. It is a modern psychological allergy known as the zero tolerance for struggle. This mindset operates on a dangerous assumption. If you aren't immediately good at something, you shouldn't be doing it. In an environment dominated by instant gratification, where video games offer simulated victories and AI writes the essay for you, we have lost the ability to tolerate the messy, awkward phase of being a novice. We trade the difficult reality for a counterfeit experience that feels safe but offers no reward. The problem with this trade is that you are discarding the most valuable part of the process. That feeling of frustration isn't a sign that you are failing. It is the sensation of your abilities stretching. Think of your character like a garden. You cannot grow deep roots in shallow, easy soil. The toil, the confusion, the failure, the feeling of being the new guy, is the enriched soil required for a complex, interesting personality to grow. Overcoming this requires a simple reframe of your internal signals. Currently, when you feel frustration, your brain interprets it as a stop sign. You need to start viewing that discomfort as a loading bar. That specific feeling of struggle is the only evidence that you are actually learning. The next time you feel like you suck at something, do not retreat to the counterfeit. Stay in the tension. That awkward silence is where you actually become someone new. The mood-first living, checking the emotional forecast before deciding whether to fulfill a basic daily commitment, is a deeply ingrained habit for many of us. Letting the unpredictable internal weather of your feelings dictate your physical actions is the defining trait of mood-first living. We are conditioned to believe that our emotional state must perfectly align with our tasks before we can begin. If we feel energized and focused, we tackle the heavy work. If we feel sluggish or uninspired, we immediately delay the effort. We treat our current mood as an absolute, unbreakable command rather than a passing, temporary suggestion. We mistakenly elevate our temporary feelings to the role of a permanent manager. The profound danger of this approach is the total destruction of consistency. Your feelings are highly volatile, shifting constantly based on minor variables like sleep quality, stress, and even daily diet. If you only execute your plans when you feel perfectly inspired, you completely surrender your long-term ambitions to the chaotic whims of your biology. You end up abandoning deeply meaningful projects the exact moment the initial excitement fades, replacing steady, compound progress with endless cycles of procrastination disguised as self-care. Your potential becomes entirely hostage to your mood swings. To break free from this trap, you must completely decouple your physical actions from your internal feelings. Treat your daily commitments as non-negotiable facts, entirely separate from your current emotional state. When the alarm goes off and the urge to stay in bed is overwhelming, simply acknowledge the sluggish feeling and physically get up anyway. Force the physical action to lead the way and trust that the mood will eventually catch up to the momentum. True discipline is simply the quiet habit of keeping a promise to yourself, entirely regardless of the internal weather. The counterfeit existence. Forging a perfect replica of a priceless painting might successfully fool a museum curator, but hanging that fake canvas in your own living room knowing it is entirely a lie brings absolutely no genuine satisfaction. Building an entire life designed exclusively to meet the expectations of your parents, your peers, or society at large is the exact same hollow performance. This is the core of the counterfeit existence. We naturally crave belonging and safety. To secure our place in the tribe, we often adopt career paths, daily habits, and long-term goals that look incredibly impressive on paper, but feel fundamentally wrong in our own gut. We memorize the script handed to us, hit our marks perfectly, and become highly skilled actors, playing a starring role in a story written by completely different people. We mistake the loud applause of the audience for actual internal happiness. The profound danger of this lifelong performance is the quiet, agonizing resentment it inevitably breeds. You might achieve massive external success, securing the exact title and the perfect house. But because those milestones were never actually your own, the victories feel completely empty. You burn through the only time you have building a beautiful monument to someone else's values. You end up rich in social status, but completely bankrupt in genuine, personal fulfillment, permanently trapped in a golden cage of your own design. To shatter this grand illusion, you must aggressively audit your deepest desires. You have to clearly locate the heavy, inherited expectations you are currently carrying and intentionally set them down. As you settle into this Sleepwise session, give yourself the radical permission to disappoint the crowd if it means finally being honest with yourself. By deliberately choosing the awkward, unpolished truth of your own authentic path over the miserable safety of a fake one, you finally step into a reality that actually belongs to you. The Altar of Convenience. Think of your daily energy like a currency. You wake up with a limited amount to spend. Throughout the day, you are constantly presented with two different vendors selling the same product. One vendor charges you effort, time, and frustration. The other vendor charges you nothing. In fact, they offer you immediate relief. This second vendor is the Altar of Convenience. We visit this altar dozens of times a day without noticing. It happens when you choose to DoorDash dinner instead of cooking, or when you scroll social media instead of calling a friend. On the surface, these seem like harmless efficiency hacks. You are saving time and avoiding hassle, but there is a hidden cost that doesn't appear on the receipt. Every time you choose the frictionless option, you are paying with a small piece of your own resilience. You are training your brain to believe that struggle is unnecessary and that discomfort is a problem to be solved instantly. Over time, this creates a fragility where even minor difficulties feel insurmountable. You lose the muscle memory required to do hard things because you have outsourced all your heavy lifting to convenience. The way to dismantle this altar is to reintroduce friction into your life on purpose. Start viewing convenience not as a friend, but as a potential thief of your capability. When you feel the urge to take the shortcut, pause and recognize the transaction. Choose to take the stairs. Choose to cook the meal. Choose to write the email yourself. You are not just doing a chore. You are buying back your own strength. The fragile beginner. Picture the exact moment you try to learn a new skill. Maybe it is speaking a foreign language or trying to paint. Your hands feel clumsy, your brain feels slow, and you have a sudden, sharp urge to stop immediately. This visceral reaction is the fragile beginner mindset kicking in. It is a defense mechanism designed to protect your ego from the discomfort of not being perfect. Our brains naturally crave competence. We like feeling smart, capable, and in control. When you start something new, you voluntarily strip away that feeling of control. The fragile beginner interprets this awkwardness as a permanent failure rather than a temporary stage. You tell yourself you just aren't a math person or an artist, deciding your potential before you have even really started. The danger here is that your world begins to shrink. If you refuse to do anything where you might look foolish, you eventually stop doing anything new at all. You become trapped in a small circle of things you have already mastered, never venturing out to where the actual growth happens. You prioritize looking cool over actually becoming capable. The solution is to reframe that feeling of cringe or embarrassment. Instead of viewing it as a stop sign, view it as the price of admission. Every master was once a disaster. That awkward phase is not a reflection of your character. It is just data. It is the raw material your brain needs to build a new skill. When you feel that urge to quit because you aren't good yet, recognize it for what it is. The sensation of your comfort zone stretching. Stay in it. The dopamine dictatorship. Imagine an invisible ruler who decides exactly what you do, when you do it, and how long you do it for. This ruler pulls a string, and you pick up your phone. They pull another, and you open a specific app. They pull a third, and you lose an hour of your life. This isn't science fiction. It is the biological reality of living under the dopamine dictatorship. Dopamine is the chemical messenger your brain uses to motivate you. In a natural environment, it drives you to find food or build shelter. But in our modern digital world, we have hijacked this system. Apps, games, and notifications are engineered to trigger artificial floods of this chemical, training your brain to seek the next hit rather than a long-term reward. You stop making conscious choices about your day and start simply reacting to the loudest signal. The danger of this dictatorship is that it erodes your ability to care about anything that doesn't offer an immediate payoff. Long-term goals, like learning a language, getting fit, or building a relationship, offer no instant chemical spike. So, under this regime, those meaningful pursuits feel boring or even painful. You become a next hit hunter, bouncing between 15-second videos while your actual life remains stagnant. To overthrow this dictator, you must practice a form of resistance called the pause. When you feel that sudden magnetic pull to check your device or distract yourself, stop. Do nothing. Sit with the boredom for just 60 seconds. That uncomfortable feeling is the sound of the chains breaking. By refusing the immediate hit, you are retraining your brain to find satisfaction in the slow, quiet work of building a real life. The process phobia. Staring at a towering mountain peak and demanding a helicopter ride to the summit completely destroys the fundamental purpose of the climb. Expecting to hold the final gleaming reward without ever enduring the dirty, exhausting effort required to actually earn it is the exact mechanism of process phobia. We exist in an environment that aggressively markets the finish line while deliberately hiding the treadmill. We see the published novel, the successful business launch, and the mastered physical skill, but we are completely shielded from the thousands of boring, repetitive hours that actually built them. Because we only ever consume the heavily polished end result, our brains naturally develop a deep, paralyzing allergy to the slow, unglamorous reality of the daily grind. The profound danger of this phobia is that it keeps you permanently trapped in the planning phase. When you are terrified of the messy middle, you actively abandon every worthwhile project the exact moment it stops being fun and starts feeling like actual work. You become a professional starter who endlessly visualizes success but physically recoils at the sight of a daily schedule. You ensure that your ambitions remain permanent fantasies because you flatly refuse to pay the necessary toll of consistent, boring repetition. To cure this allergy, you must radically rewire your entire system of internal reward. You have to completely detach your emotional satisfaction from the final outcome and tightly anchor it to the execution of the daily habit. Force yourself to celebrate the brutal, unsexy act of sitting at the desk for 2 hours or simply showing up when you are completely exhausted. By actively falling in love with the actual friction of the process, reaching the finish line simply becomes a guaranteed byproduct of your daily routine. The intellectual atrophy. Putting your arm in a heavy plaster cast for 6 months guarantees that when you finally saw it off, the muscle underneath will have withered away to almost nothing. Treating your brain like a passive storage unit instead of an active machine creates the exact same physical decay. This gradual weakening of your mental capacity through lack of use is the definition of intellectual atrophy. We are biologically programmed to conserve energy. Because thinking deeply, solving complex problems, and learning new systems burns a massive amount of calories, our brains naturally prefer the path of least resistance. We stream the show, scroll the feed, and let the algorithms serve us the answers. We stop challenging our minds with difficult material and settle into a comfortable routine of passive consumption. We mistake being entertained for being mentally active. The severe danger of this lifestyle is that you slowly lose the physical ability to process complexity. Just like a muscle that is never lifted, a mind that is never challenged becomes weak and fragile. You eventually find yourself unable to focus on a long article, struggle to learn a new software, or feel exhausted by a nuanced conversation. You unintentionally lower your cognitive ceiling until you are only capable of handling simple, pre-digested information. To reverse this decay, you must treat your mind exactly like a muscle that requires resistance training. You have to intentionally schedule time for mental exertion. Read a book that is slightly too difficult for you. Learn a language that frustrates you, or attempt to repair a broken appliance without a guide. Force your brain to sweat. By regularly exposing yourself to the discomfort of confusion and the strain of learning, you rebuild the raw mental strength required to navigate a complex world. The discomfort is danger signal. Your brain is equipped with an incredibly sophisticated alarm system. For thousands of years, its primary job was to keep you from being eaten or falling off a cliff. When it detected a threat, it flooded your body with chemicals to make you run or fight. This system worked perfectly for physical survival. However, in the modern world, this ancient wiring often malfunctions. It begins to treat psychological discomfort, like the anxiety of a difficult conversation, the frustration of learning a new skill, or the fear of public speaking, as a life or death threat. This is the discomfort is danger signal. When you sit down to do deep work and feel a sudden wave of agitation, that is your alarm system misfiring. It screams at you to stop, to flee, to find safety. You feel a physical urge to check your phone or clean your room, anything to lower the tension. You interpret this feeling as a sign that something is wrong, or that you aren't ready. The tragedy is that you obey this false alarm. You back away from the very experiences that would help you grow. You retreat into a smaller and smaller comfort zone, believing you are keeping yourself safe, when really you are just keeping yourself stagnant. You avoid the gym because it hurts, or you avoid the hard project because it is confusing. To overcome this, you must learn to distinguish between being unsafe and being uncomfortable. The next time that alarm bells rings, pause. Look at the situation. If you are not in physical danger, that feeling of agitation is actually a green light. It is the specific sensation of your boundaries expanding. Do not run from it. Lean into it. That friction is the only place where you actually change. The first try master fallacy. Picture the exact moment you try to learn a new skill. Maybe it is speaking a foreign language or trying to paint. Your hands feel clumsy, your brain feels slow, and you have a sudden, sharp urge to stop immediately. This visceral reaction is the fragile beginner mindset kicking in. It is a defense mechanism designed to protect your ego from the discomfort of not being perfect. Our brains naturally crave competence. We like feeling smart, capable, and in control. When you start something new, you voluntarily strip away that feeling of control. The fragile beginner interprets this awkwardness as a permanent failure rather than a temporary stage. You tell yourself you just aren't a math person or an artist, deciding your potential before you have even really started. The danger here is that your world begins to shrink. If you refuse to do anything where you might look foolish, you eventually stop doing anything new at all. You become trapped in a small circle of things you have already mastered, never venturing out to where the actual growth happens. You prioritize looking cool over actually becoming capable. The solution is to reframe that feeling of cringe or embarrassment. Instead of viewing it as a stop sign, view it as the price of admission. Every master was once a disaster. That awkward phase is not a reflection of your character. It is just data. It is the raw material your brain needs to build a new skill. When you feel that urge to quit because you aren't good yet, recognize it for what it is, the sensation of your comfort zone stretching. Stay in it. The entitlement to ease. Imagine standing at the base of a massive mountain, fully equipped with climbing gear, only to feel deeply offended that there is no escalator to the summit. You are not just intimidated by the climb, you feel a genuine sense of injustice that climbing is even required. This invisible, silent expectation is known as the entitlement to ease. This mindset operates on the subconscious belief that life, learning, and progress should naturally be frictionless. In a world optimized for one-click deliveries and instant digital rewards, our brains get conditioned to expect a smooth ride in every arena. When we inevitably encounter a difficult task, like mastering a complex skill, fixing a relationship, or building a discipline, the entitlement to ease twists our perception. Instead of viewing the difficulty as a normal part of the process, this mindset interprets the struggle as a personal attack. You begin to feel like a victim of circumstance. The mental energy that should be spent solving the problem is completely drained by the frustration that the problem exists in the first place. You quit not because you lack the ability, but because you feel you simply shouldn't have to try this hard. Overcoming this requires a complete reset of your baseline expectations. You must consciously accept that friction is the default state of meaningful achievement, not a glitch in the universe. The next time you face a grueling task and feel that sudden flare of resentment, pause and acknowledge that the resistance is supposed to be there. Once you stop expecting the escalator, you can finally start climbing the mountain. The identity stagnation. Picture a piece of clay sitting inside a locked glass display box. It is perfectly safe from the elements, protected from being dropped, and completely immune to damage. Because it is never touched, stretched, or fired in a kiln, it remains just a shapeless lump forever. This is the exact trap of identity stagnation. We naturally seek safety and comfort, instinctively avoiding situations that might test our limits or cause embarrassment. When you consistently avoid the struggle of learning a difficult skill, navigating a complex conversation, or being the amateur in the room, you are successfully protecting yourself from failure. However, you are simultaneously starving yourself of the very experiences required to build a solid personality. Your identity is not something you are simply born with. It is an architecture forged almost entirely through friction. When you refuse to step into environments where you might fail, you never discover what you are actually capable of enduring. You never learn your true values, your actual breaking points, or your hidden talents. You remain a mere outline of a person, often defaulting to the opinions and traits of the people or algorithms around you, because you haven't built an internal compass of your own. To break out of this stagnation, you have to purposely invite tension back into your routine. You have to break the glass case. Place yourself in environments where you are not the expert. Engage in a physical challenge that intimidates you. or a creative project where the outcome is entirely uncertain. By allowing yourself to be stretched and molded by the friction of new difficulties, you finally begin to take a definitive shape. The Spotlight Paranoia. Spilling a single drop of coffee on your shirt and immediately feeling the intense, burning heat of a massive theatrical spotlight tracking your every move is a highly exhausting illusion. Walking through a completely normal day while assuming the rest of the world is a dedicated audience actively scrutinizing your microscopic flaws is the exact engine driving spotlight paranoia. We are naturally the absolute center of our own internal universe. Because we experience every single one of our own awkward stumbles, nervous stutters, and minor embarrassments in vivid high definition, we incorrectly project that exact same hyper-awareness onto strangers. We walk into a crowded room completely convinced that everyone has paused their own complex lives simply to evaluate our posture, our clothing, or our quietest insecurities. We mistake our own internal anxiety for an external reality. The profound danger of this invisible spotlight is the intense, paralyzing self-censorship it inevitably creates. When you genuinely believe you are under constant, unforgiving surveillance, you stop taking creative risks, speaking up in conversations, or trying unfamiliar hobbies. You actively shrink your personality down to the safest, most invisible version possible, just to avoid the imaginary judgment of the crowd. You spend your entire life nervously performing a highly edited version of yourself for an auditorium that is actually completely empty. To turn off this exhausting spotlight, you must deeply internalize the incredibly liberating truth of your own insignificance. You have to actively remind yourself that every single person around you is entirely consumed by their own private anxieties. The next time you make a minor mistake in public, intentionally look around and study the room to notice how completely indifferent the world actually is. As you settle into this Sleepwise session, let go of the audience that was never really there. By accepting that nobody is truly watching you, you finally grant yourself the total freedom to drop the performance and navigate the world exactly as you are. The simulated intimacy trap. Imagine buying a beautifully wrapped box, opening it, and finding a cardboard cutout of the gift instead of the actual item. You get the visual representation of the reward, but none of the physical substance. This is the exact bargain made in the simulated intimacy trap. We all have a fundamental need for closeness and connection. Building real relationships, however, is inherently messy. It requires vulnerability, risks rejection, and demands compromise. Because this process is uncomfortable, we often seek out frictionless alternatives. We turn to digital substitutes, obsessively following the daily lives of creators, relying on artificial companions, or consuming endless media. These platforms offer the comforting illusion of being understood or accompanied, but they demand absolutely zero effort or risk in return. The danger is that these flawless, controlled interactions ruin your tolerance for reality. When you get used to connections that never argue back, never have bad days, and exist solely to cater to your preferences, real people begin to feel exhausting. You slowly isolate yourself, starving for actual human depth while gorging on artificial substitutes. To break this cycle, you have to actively choose the messiness of reality over the perfection of the screen. Start by setting strict boundaries on your digital consumption of relationships. Force yourself into environments where you must interact with people face to face, completely unscripted. It will feel awkward and unpredictable at first. Lean into that unpredictability. That discomfort is the necessary friction required to build a connection that is actually real. The path of least resistance. Imagine a river flowing down the side of a mountain. The water never decides to climb over a boulder if it can simply flow around it. It always, without exception, follows gravity into the easiest possible channel. This physics of least resistance also governs human behavior, and it is the primary architect of a mediocre life. Your brain is biologically wired to conserve energy. It treats effort as a cost to be minimized. When faced with a decision, like cooking a healthy meal versus ordering fast food, or having a difficult conversation versus staying silent, your instincts will aggressively steer you toward the option that burns the fewest calories. You naturally slide into the groove that has already been carved. The danger of this mindset is that it makes your life entirely predictable. You stop making choices and start operating on autopilot. You become a passenger to your own biology, ending up in a career, a relationship, or a health state that you didn't actively choose, but simply settled into because it was the path that required the least amount of fight. You erode your own agency until you are incapable of moving uphill. To escape this current, you must build a dam against your own instincts. You have to introduce intentional friction into your day. When you feel that magnetic pull toward the couch or the shortcut, recognize it as gravity acting on your character. Physically, stop yourself. Choose the option that requires you to stand up and engage. You must dig a new channel for your energy, one that flows uphill towards the life you actually want. The transaction over transformation. Imagine wearing a gold medal that you found lying on the sidewalk. It looks impressive to everyone else, and it shines just like a real one. But every time you look down at it, you feel absolutely nothing but emptiness. This sensation of a hollow victory is the inevitable result of the transaction over transformation mindset. We often treat our personal goals like purchases at a store. We want to exchange the absolute minimum amount of time and effort required to acquire the shiny external reward, the diploma, the job title, or the relationship status. We obsess over holding the trophy, completely ignoring the athletic development required to actually win it. We want the receipt without having the experience. The danger here is that you end up building a life filled with things you cannot sustain. If you cut corners to get a degree, you get the piece of paper, but not the competence. If you maneuver your way into a leadership position without earning it, you get the title, but not the respect. You become rich in symbols, but poor in character, constantly haunted by the deep knowledge that you are an imposter in your own achievements. To escape this mindset, you must stop viewing your daily efforts as mere payments for a future reward. Shift your focus entirely off the finish line and onto the track beneath your feet. Value the difficult studying more than the final grade. Value the grueling workout more than the mirror selfie. The real prize is never the object you receive at the end. It is the resilient, capable person you become along the way. The Embarrassment Avoidance Directive. Imagine walking into a crowded room, tripping over your own feet, and spilling a cup of coffee all over your shirt. Your face instantly flushes, your heart races, and your only desire is for the floor to open up and swallow you. Now imagine architecting your entire life around the sole purpose of making sure that feeling never happens again. This invisible, paralyzing rule is the Embarrassment Avoidance Directive. We naturally want to appear competent. Being seen as capable makes us feel secure within our social environments. However, when the fear of looking foolish becomes the primary filter for your decisions, your world rapidly shrinks. You decline invitations to try new sports because you might look clumsy. You stay silent during discussions because your idea might be flawed. You stick strictly to the narrow set of things you have already mastered. The danger here is that avoiding embarrassment means avoiding the novice phase entirely. Every single capable person had to pass through a long, awkward period of being incredibly bad at their craft. When you prioritize protecting your ego over acquiring new skills, you trade your future potential for temporary comfort. You become a prisoner to the imaginary judgment of strangers, most of whom are too busy worrying about their own insecurities to notice yours. Overcoming this directive requires a fundamental shift in how you view looking silly. You must stop treating embarrassment as a fatal injury and start treating it as a harmless temporary muscle cramp. The next time you feel the urge to hide a mistake or avoid a beginner's class, intentionally lean into the exposure. Let yourself be clumsy in public. Recognize that the brief sting of looking foolish is simply the required toll you must pay on the road to actual competence. The waiting for motivation trap. A writer sits staring at a blank screen, convinced that a sudden strike of inspiration must hit before a single word can be typed. A runner stares out the window at the rain, waiting for a sudden surge of energy to lace up their shoes. This passive anticipation is the core of the waiting for motivation trap. We fundamentally misunderstand how human drive actually works. We treat motivation like a weather system, a mysterious force that rolls in, fills us with energy, and makes difficult tasks feel effortless. We hold on to the belief that we must experience a specific emotional high before we can execute a physical action. When the feeling is absent, we assume the timing is wrong, fold our hands, and delay the work. The danger of this mindset is total, long-term paralysis. Your emotional state is entirely unreliable, fluctuating based on how much you slept, your stress levels, and 100 other microscopic variables. By tying your daily progress directly to your mood, you hand over control of your future to a completely unpredictable lottery. You end up waiting weeks or months for the perfect feeling, letting your goals decay into stagnation while you sit permanently on the sidelines. To break out of this trap, you have to completely reverse the equation in your mind. Action does not result from motivation. Motivation is generated by action. The friction of simply starting a task creates the energy required to finish it. You must systematically decouple your behavior from your emotions. Commit to doing just the first 5 minutes of the work, regardless of how uninspired you feel. By forcing the physical motion first, your brain quickly catches up, and the motivation you were waiting for finally arrives as a byproduct of the effort. The suck-free standard. A breathtaking piano performance is mesmerizing, but the 10,000 hours of wrong notes, missed tempos, and sheer frustration leading up to it are entirely invisible. We see the masterpiece and completely ignore the messy drafts. This optical illusion feeds directly into the suck-free standard. We exist in a highly curated environment where only polished final results are broadcast. Because we rarely witness the clumsy beginner phase of others, we assume it shouldn't exist for us. When we attempt a new hobby, start a project, or learn a language, and inevitably produce a terrible first attempt, a deep sense of panic sets in. We falsely equate being bad at something new with a permanent personal defect. The ultimate danger of this standard is the suffocating perimeter it builds around your life. You begin to only participate in games you know you can win. If a new opportunity requires a steep learning curve, you instinctively reject it to protect your ego from the sting of imperfection. Your world permanently shrinks to the exact size of your current abilities. You trade the vast potential of who you could eventually become for the momentary safety of never looking foolish today. To shatter this standard, you must actively embrace the necessity of producing garbage. You have to lower the bar for your first attempts all the way to the floor. The goal of day one is never perfection. The goal of day one is simply completion. Give yourself explicit, unapologetic permission to be terrible at things. Accepting the freedom to fail clumsily is the only valid passport that allows you to travel from a novice to a master. The Unlived Life. A glowing screen illuminates a dark room, displaying a breathtaking hike through a jagged mountain pass. The person watching feels a rush of excitement, a sense of adventure, and the satisfaction of reaching the summit, all without ever leaving their chair, feeling the biting wind, or enduring the ache of the climb. This silent exchange of reality for observation is the core of the unlived life. We are naturally drawn to the safety of being a spectator. Real life is inherently messy, unpredictable, and physically demanding. It requires immense energy and carries the constant risk of failure. To bypass this friction, we increasingly outsource our experiences to others. We watch creators travel, build relationships, and overcome difficult obstacles, absorbing their manufactured highlights as a comfortable substitute for our own personal development. The ultimate danger of this mindset is the quiet, creeping accumulation of regret. You spend years passively consuming the bravery and creativity of strangers, tricking your brain into feeling fulfilled, while your own potential remains completely untouched. You eventually reach a point where your deepest memories consist mostly of digital content you watched, rather than physical actions you took. You exist merely as an audience member in a story where you were supposed to be the main character. To break free from this spectator role, you must aggressively reclaim your active participation in the physical world. Trade the flawless, simulated adventure for a small, clumsy, real one. Put down the travel vlog and take a walk through an unfamiliar neighborhood. Stop watching someone else build a project and pick up the tools yourself. You must cross the barrier from consuming to doing, ensuring that the life you experience actually belongs to you. The talent over toil myth. Witnessing a master at work often feels like observing a completely different species. When someone effortlessly shreds a guitar solo or sinks a buzzer-beating shot, our brains naturally categorize them as gifted. We attribute their flawless execution to a genetic lottery, completely erasing the thousands of hours they spent failing in empty rooms and quiet gyms. This immediate assumption is the core of the talent over toil myth. We prefer the idea of innate talent because it provides a highly comforting excuse. If greatness is simply handed out at birth, then our own lack of mastery is entirely out of our control. We tell ourselves we just do not have the natural ear for music or the inherent brain for math. This mindset conveniently removes the painful responsibility of having to put in the grueling, unglamorous work required to actually get good at something. The profound danger of this myth is that it kills your potential before you even take the first step. When you believe skill is a predetermined trait, you interpret your clumsy beginner phase as definitive proof that you lack the gift. You quit at the exact moment you are supposed to start learning, trading a lifetime of capability for the temporary comfort of a built-in excuse. To overcome this myth, you must fundamentally change how you view competence. You have to strip away the romance of the natural genius. Treat every impressive skill you see not as a genetic gift, but as a receipt for thousands of hours of unseen struggle. When you start a new endeavor, fully expect to be terrible. Embrace the clumsy toil, knowing that the daily friction you endure is the only actual currency that buys the talent you want. The result-only focus. Staring exclusively at the summit of a mountain while hiking almost guarantees you will eventually trip over a tree root. Focusing solely on the final destination blinds you to the ground right beneath your feet. This physical misstep perfectly illustrates the psychological trap of the result-only focus. We are conditioned to celebrate the finish line. Society rewards the diploma, the gold medal, and the final weight loss number. Consequently, we train our brains to view the daily grind, the studying, the practice, the diet, as merely an annoying obstacle standing between us and our prize. We become obsessed with the destination and deeply resentful of the journey required to get there. The massive danger of this mindset is that it makes your daily life miserable. The actual result you are chasing makes up perhaps 1% of your timeline. The other 99% consists of the process. If you despise the daily work and only value the rare moment of achievement, you are guaranteeing a life of chronic dissatisfaction. Furthermore, when you finally do reach that coveted goal, the chemical high fades within days, leaving you empty and desperately searching for the next finish line to validate your worth. You spend your entire life sprinting toward a mirage. Overcoming this requires a complete shift in what you measure. You have to detach your sense of success from the final outcome and attach it to the daily execution. Make the goal about showing up for the workout, not the number on the scale. Celebrate the hour of deep work, not the final grade. By learning to value the friction of the process itself, you reclaim your peace of mind and guarantee your own progress. The Wiki-Wisdom Delusion. Watching a 5-minute tutorial on how to fly a commercial helicopter does not grant you the ability to safely land one in a storm. There is a massive, invisible canyon between recognizing a piece of information and actually possessing a physical skill. Mistaking that initial recognition for true competence is the defining characteristic of the Wiki-Wisdom Delusion. We currently carry the entirety of human knowledge in our pockets. Because we have immediate, frictionless access to facts, summaries, and how-to guides, our brains undergo a dangerous illusion. We read a headline or skim a bulleted list and instantly experience a chemical rush of accomplishment. We falsely wire our minds to believe that simply downloading the data into our short-term memory is the exact same thing as putting in the hours of practice. The profound danger of this mindset is intellectual fragility. You build a towering identity based on concepts you have merely borrowed, not earned. When the time comes to actually execute, to build the project, lead the team, or navigate a complex situation, the entire structure collapses. You possess the advanced vocabulary, but you completely lack the calloused hands of experience. You mistake the map for the actual territory, leaving you paralyzed the moment you step off the established path. To cure this delusion, you must actively sever the link between reading and achieving. Treat consumed information as completely useless until you have physically tested it in the real world. Force yourself into the uncomfortable position of execution. Try teaching the concept to a complete beginner without glancing at your notes, or attempt to build the project without following the step-by-step guide. The frustration you encounter during that attempt is the necessary friction that finally converts cheap information into genuine, lasting wisdom. The Competence Addiction. Playing the exact same song on the piano for 10 solid years guarantees you never hit a single wrong note, but it also ensures you never actually evolve as a musician. You secure the validation of a flawless performance without taking a shred of risk. This comfortable, invisible ceiling is the core of the competence addiction. We are deeply wired to crave mastery and the social security that comes directly from it. being exceptionally good at your job, your sport, or your routine feels incredibly safe. Your brain receives a steady, reliable stream of rewarding chemicals every time you execute a familiar task perfectly. Because this feeling of high status and control is so intoxicating, we slowly begin to unconsciously architect our entire lives around simply maintaining it. The severe danger here is that you eventually become a heavily guarded prisoner of your own expertise. To protect your pristine, undefeated record, you aggressively avoid any new arena where you might have to start at the absolute bottom. You turn down a challenging promotion that requires unfamiliar skills. You refuse to try a new physical hobby, and you stick exclusively to the narrow subjects you already dominate. Your world permanently stops expanding. By refusing to ever endure the awkwardness of being a clumsy beginner again, you trade your ultimate potential for the temporary high of looking smart today. Breaking this powerful addiction requires you to intentionally shatter your own winning streak. You must actively seek out challenging environments where you are undeniably the least knowledgeable person in the room. Sign up for a class or tackle a complex project where fumbling is practically guaranteed on the very first day. Force yourself to sit completely still in the extreme, burning discomfort of being a novice. Reclaiming the courage to look entirely foolish is the only reliable way to break out of the tutorial level and experience the rest of your life. The perception management. We naturally crave respect and validation from our peers. Because building genuine competence takes years of invisible, agonizing effort, it is incredibly tempting to take a shortcut. We start curating our vocabulary, exaggerating our job titles, and carefully staging our daily routines to project the illusion of success. We slowly transition from being active participants in our own lives to acting as full-time public relations managers for our own egos. The severe danger of this mindset is the immense psychological toll it takes to maintain. Managing a fake persona is an incredibly resource-intensive job. You end up draining all your daily energy, trying to control how everyone else perceives you, leaving absolutely zero fuel to actually develop the skills you are pretending to have. Furthermore, you trap yourself in a permanent state of paranoia, constantly terrified that someone is going to look a little too closely and expose the hollow gap between your curated reputation and your actual reality. To escape this exhausting performance, you must intentionally drop the mask. You have to actively choose substance over optics, which means giving yourself permission to look completely unimpressive while you do the actual work. Stop announcing your goals to an audience and start building quietly in the dark. Let people misunderstand your current status. When you stop burning your energy on trying to look like a finished product, you finally have the bandwidth to actually become one. The ego protection shield. Our brains are biologically wired to perceive social rejection or failure as a literal threat to our survival. To prevent the sting of criticism or the deep embarrassment of falling short, we unconsciously deploy an invisible armor. We downplay our goals, act indifferent when we lose, or aggressively criticize others before they can critique us. We convince ourselves that if we pretend we never cared in the first place, failing will not actually hurt. The massive danger of this heavy shield is that it deflects success just as effectively as it deflects pain. When you constantly operate behind a wall of detached irony or defensive pessimism, you never fully commit to any endeavor. You starve yourself of the deep, vulnerable investment required to actually master a complex skill or build a meaningful relationship. You survive the day without a single scratch, but your life remains entirely stagnant because growth fundamentally requires taking a hit. Lowering this shield requires you to intentionally expose your actual desires. You have to practice the quiet bravery of being completely uncool. State your ambitions plainly, without a self-deprecating joke to soften the blow. Try hard at something in public and let people clearly see your effort. When you finally accept that looking foolish or experiencing a failure is just a temporary bruise rather than a fatal injury, you strip away the heavy armor that is holding you down. The validation vampire. Pouring a gallon of premium gasoline into a car with a massive hole in the fuel tank guarantees you will never reach your destination, no matter how often you stop at the pump. Relying entirely on external praise to power your self-worth is the exact same mechanical failure, and it is the defining trait of the validation vampire mindset. We are social creatures who naturally appreciate a compliment or a round of applause. However, when the desire for approval mutates into a daily necessity, the internal machinery breaks down. You stop generating your own confidence and start feeding exclusively on the reactions of your peers, your boss, or a digital audience. Your self-esteem becomes a highly volatile currency, completely controlled by the fluctuating moods and opinions of other people. The severe danger of outsourcing your worth is the total loss of internal direction. You begin altering your personality, your goals, and your boundaries just to secure the next hit of praise. You abandon projects the moment the applause dies down, even if the work is deeply meaningful to you. You become a hollow vessel, constantly scanning the room to figure out who you are supposed to be today. You survive entirely on borrowed energy, which means you are perpetually exhausted and permanently insecure. To seal the hole in your tank, you must aggressively practice self-validation. You have to learn the quiet art of being genuinely proud of yourself in an empty room. Complete a difficult task and intentionally tell absolutely no one about it. Notice how the accomplishment feels when it is entirely yours, untainted by outside opinions. By slowly building a private reservoir of self-respect, you permanently cut the cord to the audience and finally become the sole owner of your own identity. The focus fragmentation. Pouring a single glass of water across 10 different dying houseplants guarantees that every single one of them will eventually wither. Distributing a finite resource too thinly results in total failure across the board. Spreading your mental energy across a dozen open tabs, overlapping projects and constant notifications creates the exact same drought in your brain. This is the core of the focus fragmentation mindset. We live in an ecosystem designed to constantly shatter our attention. A phone buzzes, an email chimes, and a random thought derails the current task before it even gains momentum. We proudly label this frantic juggling as multitasking, convinced we are multiplying our output. In reality, the human brain cannot focus on two complex things at once. It only rapidly switches back and forth, burning a massive amount of cognitive fuel during every single transition. The severe danger of this scattered approach is that you spend your entire day running on a treadmill of shallow effort. You feel incredibly busy and are completely exhausted by dinner time, yet you have made absolutely zero meaningful progress on anything of substance. You permanently lose the ability to sink into the deep, uninterrupted concentration required to solve hard problems or build high-quality work. Your potential is slowly bled dry by 1,000 tiny, irrelevant interruptions. To repair your attention span, you must aggressively build walls around your time. Treat your focus like a highly fragile physical material. Silence every alert and physically remove the phone from your workspace. Commit to doing exactly one thing for 30 uninterrupted minutes. When the inevitable itch to check a different tab arises, physically stop your hand and force your eyes back to the primary task. By practicing this deliberate isolation, you slowly weld your fractured attention back into a single, powerful beam. The algorithmic autonomy, blindly following a navigation system directly into a lake, feels completely absurd until you realize we do the exact same thing with our daily choices, handing over the steering wheel of our preferences, beliefs, and desires to an invisible string of code is the defining feature of the algorithmic autonomy mindset. We live in a highly optimized digital environment designed to predict exactly what we want before we even know we want it. We stream the recommended movie, buy the suggested product, and adopt the curated opinion. Because these platforms are so incredibly efficient at serving up content that feels tailored to us, we slowly stop putting in the effort to discover things on our own. We mistake convenience for genuine choice. The profound danger of this mindset is the quiet surrender of your own free will. You start believing that your tastes and beliefs are uniquely yours, completely ignoring the fact that they were carefully spoon-fed to you by a machine optimizing for your attention. You become trapped in a highly personalized echo chamber that constantly reinforces your current worldview and actively prevents you from ever encountering a truly challenging or uncomfortable new idea. Your personality slowly degrades into a mere reflection of your feed, stripping away the friction required to develop true character. To break out of this invisible loop, you must actively introduce chaos into your consumption. You have to intentionally rebel against the recommendation engine. Read a physical book from a genre you typically ignore, listen to an album that is entirely outside your daily mix, and actively seek out viewpoints that directly contradict your own. Reclaiming your autonomy means doing the difficult manual work of making up your own mind instead of letting a feed do it for you. The Polish oversubstance. We naturally gravitate toward the visual, surface-level aspects of a project because they are safe and highly controllable. Choosing brand colors, tweaking a website layout, or buying premium recording gear feels incredibly productive. It delivers an immediate chemical rush of accomplishment without ever exposing us to the terrifying risk of doing the actual work. We substitute the comfortable illusion of preparation for genuine, difficult execution. The profound danger of this mindset is that it acts as a highly sophisticated form of procrastination. You burn through your momentum and your energy making something look incredibly professional, yet the core offering remains completely hollow. When you finally launch, the flawless presentation cannot hide the lack of foundational value. You build a beautiful, empty storefront that immediately collapses under the weight of real-world feedback. You optimize entirely for the aesthetic and completely starve the utility, leaving you with a masterpiece of a wrapper holding absolutely nothing. To cure this obsession, you must aggressively embrace the ugly first draft. You have to force yourself to build the raw, functional core before you are allowed to touch the paint. Launch the clunky prototype. Record the audio with a basic microphone and write the messy, unformatted article. Prove that the underlying substance actually holds value before you invest a single minute in making it look pretty. By forcing the function to arrive long before the form, you guarantee that your final product is actually built to last. The Cynicism As Intelligence. Standing in an art gallery and immediately pointing out a slightly crooked frame rather than admiring the masterpiece is a strange way to view the world. Choosing to reflexively tear down the efforts of others and mistaking that critical reflex for profound wisdom is the exact trap of the Cynicism As Intelligence mindset. We live in a culture that heavily rewards the critic. Finding a flaw, predicting a failure, or exposing a hidden motive feels incredibly smart. We slowly convince ourselves that expecting the absolute worst makes us sophisticated and immune to being fooled. We falsely wire our brains to believe that optimism is just a polite word for naivety, and that the only truly intelligent perspective is a permanently exhausted, negative one. The profound danger of this chronic pessimism is that it completely paralyzes your ability to create. Tearing down a building takes a fraction of the time and talent required to actually design and construct one. When you default to cynicism, you automatically excuse yourself from the terrifying arena of trying. You sit safely on the sidelines, pointing out why every new idea will inevitably fail, while simultaneously guaranteeing that your own life remains completely stagnant. You trade the vulnerability of genuine hope for the cheap, safe armor of a sneer. To break this intellectual trap, you must actively practice the quiet bravery of earnestness. You have to intentionally risk looking foolish by hoping an idea actually works. Force a new rule into your life, where you are not allowed to criticize a project, a person, or a system unless you can simultaneously articulate a realistic way to improve it. By forcing yourself to build, rather than just observe, you replace empty criticism with actual earned intelligence. The binary success model. Flipping a light switch gives you exactly two options: total illumination or complete darkness. Treating your entire life, career, and personal growth like that simple piece of plastic hardware is the defining error of the binary success model. We are conditioned by scoreboards, exams, and pass-fail metrics to categorize every endeavor into one of two extreme buckets. We either win the championship or we are total failures. We either land the dream job or our career is a complete disaster. We completely erase the massive, complex grey area of partial victories, hard-won lessons, and incremental progress that actually makes up a real human life. The profound danger of this black and white thinking is how quickly it triggers a self-destruct sequence. When you demand absolute perfection, the first minor setback automatically registers as a total defeat. Missing one single workout becomes an excuse to completely abandon a month of physical progress. You refuse to celebrate a massive 90% improvement because your brain is entirely fixated on the 10% shortfall. This rigid, unforgiving standard permanently robs you of the quiet satisfaction of simply being better today than you were yesterday. You ensure you are always miserable, even when you are actively growing. To shatter this rigid model, you must actively learn to measure the gap instead of the goal. You have to start actively tracking the distance you have traveled from your starting point, rather than exclusively obsessing over the remaining distance to the finish line. Embrace the reality of partial credit. When a project falls short of your ideal vision, force yourself to write down 3 specific skills you gained during the attempt. By recognizing the immense, compounding value hidden in the middle ground, you finally escape the exhausting trap of all or nothing living. The resilience deficit. We have constructed a modern environment heavily optimized for absolute comfort and frictionless convenience. Because our groceries arrive in minutes and our entertainment streams instantly, our brains naturally begin to expect our personal ambitions, relationships, and careers to operate on that exact same smooth timeline. We falsely wire ourselves to believe that if a path is genuinely right for us, it should feel incredibly easy. When we finally encounter the normal, required struggle of learning a new skill or navigating a complex problem, we misinterpret that friction as a definitive signal to quit. The profound danger of this artificial fragility is the permanent cap it places on your physical and mental potential. If your default response to a minor setback is to immediately fold your hand, you will never endure the necessary heat required to forge actual competence. You end up living a highly restricted, heavily padded life, constantly retreating at the very first sign of resistance and permanently trapping yourself at the starting line of every endeavor. You trade the deep, lasting satisfaction of overcoming a difficult obstacle for the immediate, hollow relief of just walking away. To rebuild your emotional shock absorbers, you must intentionally practice voluntary discomfort. You have to actively seek out small, manageable doses of friction to callous your mind. Force yourself to complete a grueling physical task when you are tired. Fix a broken item without looking for a shortcut, or deliberately sit in a cold shower for 2 minutes. By repeatedly forcing yourself to stay in the awkward, frustrating space of a minor struggle without quitting, you slowly forge the mental armor required to survive the heavy blows that reality will inevitably throw at you. The borrowed opinion. Wearing a rented tuxedo to run a marathon feels completely ridiculous, yet we comfortably dress our minds in heavy beliefs we never actually went through the effort of measuring or tailoring to fit reality. Adopting a pre-packaged worldview simply because it aligns with your current crowd is the exact mechanism of the borrowed opinion. We live in an information ecosystem that highly rewards rapid reaction over deep reflection. Because forming a genuine, nuanced stance on a complex issue requires hours of reading, uncomfortable internal debate, and the willingness to be wrong, our brains naturally seek a frictionless shortcut. We find a charismatic creator, a popular headline, or an outspoken peer, and we simply copy and paste their conclusion into our own heads. We mistake the simple ability to repeat a loud talking point for the hard-earned achievement of actual comprehension. The profound danger of this intellectual outsourcing is that you completely hollow out your own mind. When you build your identity on thoughts you never actually generated, your convictions become incredibly brittle. You become highly susceptible to manipulation, operating as a mere megaphone for whoever happens to be the most persistent voice in your feed. Furthermore, you lose the crucial human ability to navigate nuance, automatically viewing anyone who disagrees with your rented beliefs as a cartoonish enemy rather than a complex person. To reclaim your intellectual independence, you must actively build a firewall between consumption and conviction. You have to institute a mandatory waiting period before adopting a new, loud stance. Force yourself to clearly articulate the strongest possible argument of the opposing side before you are allowed to officially hold an opinion. By refusing to let a digital feed do your thinking for you, you finally trade the cheap comfort of simply blending in for the quiet strength of genuine understanding. The victim of circumstance. Sitting in the passenger seat of a moving car, staring out the window, and bitterly complaining about the destination while completely ignoring the empty driver's seat right next to you is a terrible way to travel. Surrendering the steering wheel of your life to external events and blaming the road for where you end up is the exact mechanism of the victim of circumstance mindset. We all face unpredictable storms, unfair advantages, and genuine hardships. Because processing the sting of failure or stagnation requires an immense amount of emotional energy, our brains naturally look for a convenient escape hatch. We point to the economy, an unfair boss, or sheer bad luck as the sole authors of our current situation. We completely absolve ourselves of any responsibility, mistaking the very real presence of obstacles for a total absence of personal agency. The profound danger of this mindset is the permanent paralysis it creates. When you truly believe that external forces completely control your destiny, you immediately stop trying to improve your condition. You build an entire identity around your grievances, actively collecting new injustices to justify your lack of progress. You trade the difficult, empowering reality of being the architect of your life for the comfortable, helpless role of a permanent bystander. You survive the unfairness, but you guarantee that your future will look exactly like your past. To break out of this passenger seat, you must aggressively claim ownership of your response. You have to accept that while you rarely get to choose the difficult circumstances that happen to you, you possess total control over how you react to them. Force yourself to find one single, microscopic action you can take today to improve a bad situation, regardless of who is actually at fault for creating it. By shifting your focus from the unfairness of the board to the strategy of your next move, you finally take back the wheel. The zombie walk. Driving down a familiar highway and suddenly realizing you have absolutely no memory of the last 20 miles is a deeply unsettling experience, allowing that exact same localized amnesia to completely consume your daily routine, your relationships, and your career is the defining characteristic of the zombie walk. We naturally build habits and routines to conserve mental energy. The human brain loves efficiency, so it quickly programs the morning commute, the workday tasks, and the evening wind down into an automatic sequence. This is a survival mechanism designed to free up processing power for new challenges. However, when we stop introducing new challenges altogether, the autopilot simply takes over the entire flight. We stop actively participating in our own lives and begin merely floating through the motions. The profound danger of this sleepwalking state is the silent theft of your time. Because there is no acute pain or sudden crisis, there is absolutely no warning alarm to wake you up. You simply exist in a comfortable, numb grey area where days seamlessly blur into years. You stop noticing the texture of your life, missing the subtle opportunities to pivot, grow, or deeply connect with the people around you. You arrive at the end of a decade and realize you did not actually live 10 years. You just lived the exact same day 3,000 times. To snap out of this trance, you must actively introduce friction into your schedule. You have to intentionally break the smooth groove you have worn into the floorboards. Drive a completely different route to work, rearrange your physical workspace, or commit to a physical activity that demands total, present focus. By intentionally forcing your brain to process novel information, you disable the autopilot and finally step back into the driver's seat of your own life. The counterfeit confidence. Pumping a bicycle tire full of helium might make it feel incredibly light for a few minutes, but the exact moment it hits a patch of rough gravel, the tire completely shreds. Relying on an artificially inflated sense of self-belief without the sturdy rubber of actual experience to back it up is the defining mechanism of counterfeit confidence. We exist in a culture that heavily champions the idea of faking it until you make it. Because genuine confidence takes years of awkward stumbling and quiet effort to build, we often choose the immediate shortcut of simply projecting an unbreakable exterior. We memorize the right buzzwords, adopt an aggressive posture, and loudly demand respect before we have laid a single brick of actual competence. We mistakenly equate the sheer volume of our voice with the actual depth of our knowledge. The profound danger of this hollow bravado is that reality always eventually calls your bluff. When you operate entirely on counterfeit confidence, you live in a constant, exhausting state of paranoia, permanently terrified that someone will ask a detailed question and expose the empty space behind your loud claims. Furthermore, this artificial shield actively prevents you from ever asking the basic questions required to learn. You become trapped in a self-imposed prison of your own hype, completely unable to grow because you are too busy pretending you are already a master. To replace this fragile balloon with solid ground, you must aggressively embrace the quiet power of admitting what you do not know. You have to intentionally strip away the fake armor and stand comfortably in your own lack of knowledge. Shift your focus entirely toward doing the unglamorous, repetitive work required to build actual skill instead of rehearsing your sales pitch. By trading the loud, hollow noise of unearned pride for the quiet, undeniable proof of genuine ability, you build a foundation that no amount of pressure can crack.